Hey, y'all. Welcome to the Reckless Optimist podcast. My name is Megan. I'm a family nurse practitioner with a deep passion for mental health. On this show, we showcase guests who have shown tenacity, grit, mental strength, and who embody the word resilience. A quick disclaimer before we start. This show is not a substitute for mental diagnosis or treatment. We do recommend that if you're struggling with your own emotional well-being, you see a mental health provider. I'm so excited that you guys are here. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, today on the podcast we have Lindsay. Lindsay is someone I have known probably 10, 15 years, and she's someone where our lives have just intertwined. And every time that I see her, because we'll go, months in between seeing each other, we just click. I feel like we're soul sisters in certain ways. It's so funny. We're even wearing like the same exact bright pink color on the interview. She is someone who's very special. She definitely has an extreme spiritual faith, and she's been through a lot in her life. She talks about it with such strength, though. It's amazing to hear her story. Trigger warning, we do talk about suicide. Lindsay has experienced a lot of loss in her life, and she's definitely an advocate for families who have dealt with suicide. So we do speak about that. She's someone I look up to and the faith that she has. She, lost her father when she was young, and we talk about what it's like to be a young person who's lost a parent and what that life looks like after. We talk a lot about motherhood and about, how to be someone who gives back to the community. I think you guys are really going to love this episode, so let's get into it. Hey, everyone. Help me welcome Lindsay to the podcast.
Hey, guys.
I am so excited that you're here. So I want to tell everyone how we know each other because it's kind of a fun story. So I think we ran in the same circles in college, but we did not go to the same college. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Where did you go to school?
UNG. Well, it used to be North Georgia College and State University, but now it's known as University of North Georgia. So.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. But we ran in the same circles, and then flash forward 10 years, we were at the same gym together working out. I think we had just had babies, probably postpartum, and you were hustling in the gym. And I remember coming up to you and talking to you because you were hustling, and we found that connection that we had somehow ran in the same circles in college. And then fast forward a few more years, and I was at the playground in my neighborhood with my babies, and you were there with your babies.
Yes. Yeah. Such a small world.
Such a small world. So now we're neighbors, which is so fun.
And now I get to see you hustling and running in the neighborhood, which is so great.
And I see you walking the neighborhood all the time. And
all
I know
the time.
You've done 75 hard 20 times now. Yeah. That's
only
awesome.
Once, Megan. Only once. I'm actually in phase 2, which is part 3 of 4 of the 75 hard year.
Okay.
But I've technically only done 75 hard one time. So
okay. I had a guest on a few episodes ago that 75 hard program changed her life. So I'm a big fan. I've done it myself. I think it's so good. It's simple. It's structured. And I think that's so good for people. And it's long enough for it to make long lasting change.
For sure.
So we're going to start our episode out like we do every time with a quote. And I was thinking about the quote to use for your episode, and this one just came to me. I had saved it in my notes app. Are you someone that save things in your notes app too?
I have a gazillion notes. I have to go and search in the notes to find things. So yes.
Yes, I have a whole book in my notes, and it was so crazy. A few months ago, somehow I accidentally deleted a very long important note, and I was freaking out. I was crying. I had to get my medical assistant at work to calm down. He's young, and he was like, I can fix this for you. And I was able to get it back. But anyway, I had this quote saved in my notes app, and when I was looking through quotes, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the one for Lindsay's episode. Yeah. So I actually don't know who said it, and I tried to research who said it. That part is a mystery, but it's a powerful quote. Okay. It goes, every difficult thing that you've ever had to overcome in your life was ordained by or approved by God to make you strong enough for the thing for which he created you. What does that make you feel?
Gosh, one thing which I'm sure I will be telling my story here in a little bit, but one thing that always kind of resonated with me growing up was that God would never let anything bad happen to you. People would say that. And I don't really believe that. I believe that nothing is a surprise to God, but because of sin, bad things do happen, right? And so I do believe, the quote says, that things are ordained by God, but he did not necessarily make them that way. And so I believe that that is a big part of my story and my dad's story, which we will get into. But I just think that, my faith is such a big part of my life. And it truly is, that quote kind of sums up my life in a lot of ways. I love that you picked that for me. I think it's so appropriate. And I just feel like, God truly has written our stories as beautifully and perfectly as he does. And that doesn't always mean that bad things won't happen, and that things like grief and, addiction and things like that can't enter into our stories. But that was not part of God's plan. And so there is a difference and a distinction there. And I think the quote does a really good job of kind of explaining that.
Yeah, absolutely. You're definitely one of those people that I look up to in terms of like spiritual mentors. You have this like energy and aura around you of like hope and God. Like you just exude.
That's so sweet.
You exude it. I definitely look up to you in that way. For me, this quote brings up a lot of things. So, my history with alcohol use disorder, I found God on my knees begging for him to save my life. Before that, I did not have a relationship with him. So mine's not your typical spiritual journey. However, he did save my life. And after that, it was not overnight. I had to put a lot of work in. It's evolving still to this day, but like you had said, it's my foundation now, and I do everything from that foundation. I also think like when you go through hard times, you experience such positive psychological growth, and it gives you this appreciation for altruism and empathy, and also gives you like a greater appreciation for life. But in the moment, it is really hard to see those things.
Yes.
When you're going through them. But anyway, I want to get into your story. I know a little bit about it, but I've never heard you actually tell the full story. And I know that you're, really mental health advocate, and you speak about everything that's happened to you. So I'm going to let you start wherever you feel comfortable.
Yeah, great. Well, again, my name is Lindsay. I am married to my precious husband, Cole. I often call him Zaddy. That's a whole nother story, but we won't get into that right now. But we have 2 kids. Alice is about to be 9 next month, and then Henry is 6.5, which is entirely crazy to think about. I feel like it goes by so fast, which your kids are so big. And we live in Cumming, so we live right down the street from you. One thing that I think is important about my story is that I certainly have what I would consider the perfect family now, but I did not grow up in a typical perfect family, although I felt like my childhood was perfect in a lot of ways. My parents were divorced when I was young, so about 5 or 6. I was very well loved growing up. My mom and dad actually got along really well. Something I say to people often when I hear about people going through divorce, I'm like, hey, don't make it messy for the kids. There's no reason for it to be messy. One of the greatest gifts my parents gave me was that they were always positive about each other in front of me. Now, certainly behind closed doors, that may have been a different story, but I never was involved in the mess, which was such a gift to me. And so I grew up pretty, normal in a 2-home household, if you will. My parents were divorced, but both of my parents were very involved in my life. My mom got remarried to an amazing man, Mac. He was my stepdad until he passed away in 2013 of Hodgkin's lymphoma. And that was the second of 3 major losses in 5 years for me. And my dad married a woman, my stepmom, Beth, who I'm still very close with, even though my dad has passed. He married her way too long after they started dating. They should have gotten married a lot earlier, but she had 3 sons. And so I like to say that I kind of had the best of a only child growing up, because I was an only child until I really wanted siblings. And then I had 3 stepbrothers, and my dad ended up having another little girl, Faith. So I was 14 when she was born. And really, after that, my life was pretty normal. Graduated high school, played sports in high school, went to college, got a business degree. In college, my stepdad was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. And that was really where my faith was first tested in a big way. I remember hearing about his diagnosis, and it was shortly after my mom had breast cancer, and my mom is in remission now. She's fine. But I remember feeling really scared because my stepdad was an incredible man. I was very close with him. I like to say I had 2 amazing dads. Even though he wasn't my dad, he filled a lot of gaps in my life. And my stepdad and I were super close. He had a son he was estranged from. And so in a lot of ways, we kind of rescued each other in the best ways with our relationship. And so When my stepdad was diagnosed, I remember feeling very scared. And that was the first time that I really felt myself pull away from God in a big way. I was kind of angry with him. I was like, how could you let this happen to this person that I love so much? Especially right after my mom had had breast cancer. I was feeling very like just mad in general. My stepdad ended up going through treatment. While I was doing that, I was actually raising money for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So that was like a really healthy outlet for me to be running races and raising money while doing that. And then Mac went into remission and I graduated college. He was doing well. I got my first job at the Chamber of Commerce here in Cumming. They like to say now that I'm like the mayor of Cumming, which is kind of funny because I know a lot of people. And I think it really is just because I had the best first job out of college. Definitely not the mayor though. So anyway, I just like really that first part of being tested in my faith it was a good and a bad thing because I feel like God kind of like redeemed himself when Mac went back into remission. But I didn't really deal with the grief of that diagnosis, right? Because in a lot of ways, Mac changed. I mean, cancer does that. It changes family dynamics. And so I feel like I was very just kind of like in the waters with God for a while. So flash forward, I guess it was in my late 20s, Mac had open heart surgery. He almost died. He had to have emergency open heart surgery. That was another time where I was like, God, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this to us? We've already been through hell and back after his cancer diagnosis. How dare you? And so again, it was one of those things where I was leaning into my faith, but I was really angry. And I was very much like talking to God about my emotions and really being honest with him with how I was feeling, which I always encourage people to do. Like, God gave us these emotions for a reason, right? Like, tell him how you're feeling. He already knows, but he wants to hear from you. And so Mac came out of that fine. That was around the time that I met my husband, Cole, and he was shortly after diagnosed again. He had a reoccurrence of his cancer. And at the time, my grandmother, so my mom's mom, who I was extremely close with, my mom and I were like best friends. We always have been. I was very close with her mom. I called her Nana. She had been diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis. So here we are, like, just the waves are crashing. And my grandmother got very sick very fast. I don't know if you remember, Megan, but there was this big volcano in Europe that hit or erupted, and it like closed all the airways over there for like a month. It was insane. My mom, my grandmother, and I were supposed to go to Europe for 2 weeks together. And we had been planning this trip for years, and it was canceled. And that was right before she was diagnosed. And it was like a blessing because there was no way that she was going to be able to walk around Europe with pulmonary fibrosis. There was no way. And we had no idea how sick she was because she was that kind of woman that, just, I'm fine. Everything's fine. So we took her to Charleston very last minute. That was the last trip we ever got together. She died pretty suddenly after her diagnosis, just a few months later. And that was the first of the 3 losses in 5 years. So she died in 2011. She actually died on my husband's birthday, the first birthday we spent together as a couple. And again, I was angry. I was like, God, why are you doing this to us? And that was the first time that I really feel like God was speaking to me and saying like, I didn't take your grandmother from you. Like that's not what I want you to take from this. And so I really remember as she was passing, my mom and I were there, she was going to be with the Lord. And I remember sitting there and just praying like, God, please take her. But at the same time, I was mad he was taking her. And so I remember in that moment, I really had this like powerful experience of giving him my emotions. Like I was so upset because I'm watching this woman I care about so much literally die. And if you've never watched someone die, it is a very emotional experience, especially when they have pulmonary fibrosis and they're literally suffocating to death. But I remember sitting there with her and, the rattling of the lungs and just like truly horrific sounds, but also feeling so much peace in my heart. And I feel like God really did like reach down and just say to me, like, I've got her now. And that was just a really beautiful experience for me. I think that was one of the first real spiritual experiences I can remember. And so again, that was in 2011. Mac's cancer journey continued on. We took him all over the country. We took him all over trying to find a solution for the problem, right? And unfortunately, he was out of options. He was kind of a difficult medical case, and he had tried so many different cancer drugs that he ended up passing of his Hodgkin's lymphoma. And he died about 6 months before Cole and I were getting married. And so again, like, here I am in this really joyful time in my life, experiencing really deep grief. Him and my mom had a beautiful marriage. They were each other's person, you know, and Mac and I had a really great relationship. And in a lot of ways, I felt like God was taking one of my dads from me, because he did. And so, you know, going into the wedding season, I was experiencing deep grief. My mom was, of course, mourning, but also trying to plan this great celebration for Cole and I, which she did a beautiful job of, you know, dealing with the crux of emotions, if you will. But again, I can remember my faith being challenged and really feeling like, gosh, like, how am I supposed to feel joy when I'm this sad, you know? And I feel like in life, we, you know, even starting as a little kid, we're given like first aid training. Like, you get a cut, you put a Band-Aid over it, right? But we get more training on that than we do deep emotional loss, right? Like death, divorce, other, you know, emotional losses. And I remember feeling like I have all these emotions that I don't know what to do with. And at the time, I was not seeing a counselor. I was kind of dealing with it on my own and taking things as I could to the Lord. But I felt a lot of it like really building up. And I started to experience my first like bout of anxiety leading up to our wedding, and just, you know, what goes into that in general. I just was feeling a lot of stress and overwhelm with just, again, the joy and the grief that kind of exists in those moments. And so Cole and I got married. My mom ended up walking me down the aisle, which was so sweet. And shortly after that, my dad, my biological dad, who I had a great relationship growing up overall. I mean, he was very hard on me in a lot of ways, but he loved me and he did his best. But my dad really kind of took a turn for the worse. Kind of pausing on that, I want to kind of emphasize my dad for a second, because that's really where my story kind of takes off. So my dad, his biological dad, left him when he was very little. And it was something that my dad never dealt with. So it festered as mental health issues, right? He never would admit that. That's really where his mental health issues started. I feel like he never really acknowledged that that was a problem, because he had a great stepdad that stepped in for him. His mom got remarried, and that kind of became his dad. And so he struggled with just his mental health. But my dad was the kind of guy, and you see this so often in people that struggle with their mental health. He was the bubbly, funny, you know, outgoing, always make you laugh, goofy. He was that guy. And so no one ever knew how bad it was internally, right? And so my dad and my stepmom had been married for quite some time. I don't know how many years at this point, but my dad really started struggling mentally, and he owned a construction business that was always up and down. He also, you know, was dealing with paying child support to help support my little sister, and financially things were rough for him. And so, you know, the weight of everything, I think, just started to build up, and you add that with mental health issues, and it just becomes kind of a nightmare, right? And so when we first kind of got the red flag that my dad was not doing well mentally was in late 2015. I remember my stepmom kind of alluding, you know, anytime you were around him, you could kind of tell like something's not quite right. You know, he's very high, very low. But I remember my stepmom alluding to the fact that like he and her were not doing well, and that she was very unhappy. And of course, like for their marriage, I wanted them to try to stick it out, but I didn't know how bad things had gotten. And so I was pregnant at the time. So Cole and I were expecting Alice in May of 2016. And I was pregnant. And in February of 2016, my dad went up to the mountains and on the phone with my stepmom shot his gun off. And my stepmom literally thought that that was it, because he hung up the phone. And so you can imagine at that point, everybody starts panicking. You know, she's calling the officials. We're trying to find where he is. He had turned his phone off, so his location was off. And that was that day was traumatic. I mean, 7 months pregnant at this point, and I'm feeling like my dad may be dead, but also if he's alive, how is this going to go? And so I eventually got in touch with him. I was told by Cole, my husband, that he was not welcome at our house because we didn't know what kind of state he was in. I'm pregnant, you know. And so I told my dad, I said, you have no other choice, but you have to drive yourself to the hospital. You have to go into the hospital, and they're of course going to do a psych hold on you because of your condition. You're threatening, suicidal thoughts. And so he did. He drove himself to Northeast Georgia Medical, checked himself in, and they held him there. And then they transferred him to a facility in Athens for about a week where we went and picked him up. In the meantime, my stepmom was very adamant that he had to move out of the house, which no one can blame her for that decision. Again, I'm 7 months pregnant, doing all of this, working a full-time job. My husband at the time was traveling Sunday through Thursday. So you can imagine the weight of all of this on me, but we got it done. We went and picked him up. He stayed with us for a few nights, and then we moved him back into his own home. And from February until March, every single day, my dad was unloading on me. He was emotionally unloading his unhappiness and just the weight of his problems, and unfortunately in March, so it was March 10th, my dad died by suicide. And it was a day that him and my sister and I were supposed to meet for lunch. And, I remember that week I had a conversation with him and I set some boundaries for myself. And I just said, Dad, I love you and I want you to get help, and I've tried to help you, but this is something you have to do for yourself. You have to make the decision to get help for yourself. And that was on a Monday, and then Thursday we got the call. And it wasn't until after he passed that my stepmom told me that he had been using meth. And, I remember at the time being like, what? He's doing what? I was shocked. I guess I shouldn't have been shocked because of the way he was acting, but I'd just never been around anybody that had done hard drugs like that. So I didn't know what to look for, I just thought the up and down was very normal. But, we basically figured out that morning he had used, and he had been using for a few months at that point. Dealing with a loss by suicide is so different than the other losses, right? I expected those in a lot of ways. And so when you have a loss that is sudden and unexpected, I can't say that it's harder, but I can say that it's very different. Of course, my dad dying like that is tragic. I tell people now, because I've really tried to be a source of connection for people that are walking through this. I tell people now, I feel bad for people that are that low. I really do. And I feel bad that my dad literally thought that there was no other way out. And a lot of people ask me, am I angry with him? I was actually never angry with him. Maybe little bursts of anger, if I'm being honest, but I was never overwhelmed with anger. If anything, I was overwhelmed with sadness. I was certainly angry with the mess that he left for me, because I ended up having to probate a will that he didn't have. He died in March. I had Alice in May, and I don't even really remember the first year of her life because of the grief that I was carrying. And Megan, I think that my story with my dad is not unique. I mean, there's a lot of people that walk this road of losing someone to suicide. And I remember one of the first calls I made was to my pastor. I called and I just said, I need you to tell me that my dad's okay. Because I think there's this misunderstanding and this misconception that people that die by suicide, they go to hell. And, I'm going to say that I've formed my own faith opinion about this, taken this up with the Lord many times. And I believe that my dad loved Jesus at one point. And so I believe that my dad had a conversation. What was said in that conversation, I don't know. But I do believe that Jesus gave him that opportunity. And so, I hope that I will see him again one day, which gives me a lot of peace, and gives me hope. But, the second call I made was to make an appointment with counseling. My mom had an established relationship with her counselor. And so she got me in very quickly, I think probably within a couple of days. And I started my therapy journey, and therapy changed my life. I mean, truly, I owe everything to Kim. She helped me process my dad's loss, but also my other losses, because I never really processed those. And so I did a lot of work with her. I was seeing her twice a week for a while. I still see her occasionally. One thing that I asked myself early on was, are you going to let this loss define your life, or are you going to let this loss give you purpose for your life? And I decided from the very beginning that it was going to give me purpose, and that I was going to use this loss to help people, and that I was going to use it to, bring hope to people, because it is a subject that society just doesn't want to talk about. I've kind of made it my mission to normalize, not suicide, but normalize talking about it, because those people matter. It matters that we talk about it and we destigmatize it, because that's how we will eventually eradicate it. And unfortunately, with my dad, he had talked about it. And there is this thought in the world of like suicide that if they talk about it, they'll never do it. And that could not be further from the truth. And all of those things have to be taken seriously. And if there's one thing that I prayed about early on as I was going through therapy, was just God use me somehow. And I still don't really know what that looks like, but I think sharing authentically my journey and my grief journey and my dad's story, I think he has used me already, which is really beautiful. So I think I'll pause there.
Wow. I don't know if you saw, but you were making me cry.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's good. It's a cathartic release. There was a lot of things in there. I got chills a lot. I'm like, is it cold in here? Am I just having goosebumps from this story? I mean, wow. I think that I have a lot to say. I'm still crying, by the way.
Don't worry. One thing I was going to say, Megan, is being able to talk about a loss is normal and it's healthy.
Yeah.
I can't say that 8 years ago, I could have had a conversation like this and not been bawling my eyes out. But that's how it's relieving to be able to talk about your loved ones and share our story, because that's how we connect with other people. So I'm sorry I made you cry.
No, that's good. It's good. I've only cried one other time on the show. So you're number 2. So a few questions. Well, a few comments. One is that, I can relate to what you were going through. And I think there's certain type of experiences in your life that change you forever, and seeing a loved one pass away right before your eyes, you are forever changed from that. And so when you were talking about that, I went through something very similar with my father, and I had twins, and they were 3 months old when he passed away. So very similar kind of time frame to you. Like that first year is such a blur when you're dealing with grief. And it's this weird balance of like joy and sorrow, because you're happy you have these babies, but you're also like really suffering, with the grief. But I remember, similar to what you talked about, like sitting by his bedside, and he had that, that kind of breathing they do right before they pass away, and just thinking, just take him. Like, I can't watch him suffer like this anymore. And then having guilt about those feelings of wanting him to go. But yeah, I mean, I think the way that you describe how, talking about it to make it less of a stigma, like that is so interesting to me. And I agree with you. I think the more you try to hide these types of things, the further the shame grows around it. And then the problem just gets worse.
For sure. I think, 10 years ago, no one talked about this, right? And I do think that it is changing ever so slightly. I mean, we have had a family lose people to suicide, and they've never spoken about it. And, it's hard because everybody's grief is different. Like, one thing that was so eye-opening to me is me and my little sister, she was 14 when our dad died, but we lost the same person, but our journeys were so different because our relationship with him was so different. So you can lose the same person, but the grief and the loss is so unique because your relationship is unique. And I never put that together. I think that, anybody that loses someone to suicide, there's naturally a protection that kind of kicks in. You want to protect the person that died. You want to protect them from the judgment that naturally comes after someone, chooses to do that. But I think that's also part of it, is we have to say their name, and we have to talk about it, and we have to be honest with what happened, because that's how we inform people of almost like the warning. I feel like there were so many warnings that we should have paid attention to. But at the same time, something that I had to work through with my therapist was there was nothing that we could have done, said, to stop his decision. That was an individual decision that he made. And I think that that is something that a lot of people carry for a long time, especially people that lose their children to this. I think that that is a hard thing to accept. And it took me a long time. It did. And I still wrestle with it sometimes because of the conversation we had earlier that week. I carried some guilt over putting in a boundary. But again, that was an independent decision that he made. And I have to accept that, because there's nothing I can do to bring him back. And I fully believe that the way that we end suicide is talking about it. And we talk about how can we help these people on the front end of that decision. And I just believe that like education and sharing our stories and talking about these people that are struggling, and that really a lot of the time it's the people you would never suspect are struggling. That's how we get in front of it.
Yeah. It's interesting what you're talking about, how you and your sister experienced grief differently. When my father passed away, I felt like I was grieving a lot more than everyone else. And maybe it's just because I show my emotions a lot more. But I also think like there's a direct relationship between grief and love. So like the more you loved someone, the bigger you're going to grieve. So like don't be embarrassed of the grief either, because I think some people hide it or they're ashamed of not being able to get over something 6 years down the road. All that means is that you really, really loved that person,
Mm-hmm.
And I love what you talked about, leaving his legacy and continuing to talk about him, because that's so important too.
Yeah. And I really firmly believe that if my dad were in the right state of mind, he would have never chosen that. And that's why I think like what you do in the recovery world is so beautiful, because I do believe that his addiction played a huge role in adding to his mental health issues. I'm not going to say that because he used that morning, that's why he did that, but there is a strong correlation to drug use and substance abuse and mental health issues and suicidal thoughts. And, I have to believe that as we talk about this in communities that, we are raising awareness, and people that are struggling can see almost like how hard it is for people on the other side of that. Because one thing I share every year on the anniversary is that I really believe that if my dad would have known what it would have done to us, me and his wife and, my kids who have never got to meet him, like he would have never done that in the right frame of mind. And that's the kicker, is he had substances that were not helping his mental health problems, and he had mental health issues that he was not getting help for. And so we have to be better about talking about therapy and normalizing that, and normalizing that it's okay to struggle. We all struggle. Getting help for that is okay, especially for men. There is just such a stigma around men getting therapy that they need, and it's okay to admit that you need some help. We all need help.
Yeah. I have some questions about your childhood. So you had mentioned about your dad's addiction. Did he have an addiction when you were growing up, or did he hide that from you? Did you grow up, knowing that your father was addicted to things? Kind of describe that part.
Yeah. So my dad was not like an addict in the sense of like he, used drugs growing up. Not that I knew of anyway. I mean, he definitely was in that world of like a lot of pot smoking, but I don't remember my dad ever using drugs in front of me, or even really abusing alcohol as a child. Now, as an adult, my dad certainly would have moments, and, there were times and situations where he would abuse alcohol, but it wasn't a normal thing for me growing up. I really didn't become aware of that until I was an adult. So, it could have been that he was hiding it from me, but I don't recall as a child seeing that.
Did he ever try to get sober, go to a 12-step, any rehab, anything like that? Yeah. Now, are you open and honest with your children about, what happened with your father?
That's a great question, and something I've been wrangling with and talked to my therapist a lot. I have not told them how my dad died. The conversation as of now has been that my dad was sick. Now, Alice is 9 next month, and she is wise beyond her years. And I've really been feeling this tug in my heart that the time is coming where I need to be honest with her about what happened, because I want her to hear about that from me first. And I also want her to hear about suicide from me first. I don't want that to be a comment that she backhandedly hears and then is curious about. And then that's how we have the conversation. So I've been in prayer about just how I'm going to talk about that with her. And, if I'm being honest, I'm a little fearful that it might be scary for her, because that thought and that image that I think naturally can come up can be scary for a child. And I don't want her to be scared of that. But I am ready to be honest with her. I will tell you, I connected with a woman out on the West Coast, and she lost her husband to suicide. And she has been so encouraging to me over talking to my kids and being honest with them. And so just, again, like talking about it and sharing our stories can really inspire people to do the same. And that's where I really have gained my courage from her and just my counselor. And so soon I will be having that conversation with at least Alice.
Yeah.
For now.
I think as a mother, when it's time. Like, know your children. People are going to give you advice, but you are the one that ultimately will know when she is emotionally ready to have that discussion about it. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your therapy. I'm a big fan, huge fan of therapy. I think everyone should do therapy. I started therapy. I called a therapist the day I got sober, the day I begged God to save me and realized my life was in shambles. My sister, who has many degrees in psychology, was like, Megan, you need help. You need someone with an unbiased opinion. Look at your blind spots. You need to talk to someone. You keep everything inside and you don't ever let anyone know that you have any problem. Because I have the whole perfectionism problem in recovery from that. And she was like, you really need to call therapists like right now. Do it right now. Hang up with me and call one. And I'd never seen one before. So I did. I made an appointment. And I think it was a week later, I finally went into this therapist, this man, older man. I picked him on purpose. I was like, I need an older man. I don't have a grandpa. Maybe this man can be my grandpa. And he said a lot of nice things to me. But the best thing he ever said to me, I was sitting there in his office, just full of shame and guilt. Like, how did I let my life get to this point? Like, I am an addict. Like, my life is in shambles. I was on the brink of suicide myself, to bring it, kind of back to what happened with your father. And he looked at me and he said, I want you to know that you're not broken. You can come back from this. You are not broken. You're going to walk out of this office and you're going to be okay. And it really fueled me. And, I worked with him for a year, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And it, like you described, it was very transformative for me. And I think there's a lot when it comes to therapy. It's the cathartic release of an emotion. It's also having someone kind of bounce back ideas to you. And then I also think it taps into the subconscious mind, which directs so much of our life that we don't even know it.
Absolutely. My experience with my therapist, honestly, I was kind of forced into it because my mom's like, you're going to therapy, like you're going to need it, and I didn't know how much I needed it, to be honest. Like, I walked in there not knowing what to expect and leaving feeling like, even just after the first session, like, oh my goodness, this huge weight has been lifted. And my dad just died by suicide a week ago. There were lots of like nuggets that I took away from, like, I like to call it like the really like deep therapy that I did right after my dad passed. But I worked through this book with her, and I actually suggest it to so many people. And it's not just for death, it's for any loss. So like marriage, job, anything, like a relationship, a friendship. And I've done it twice. I worked through it in regards to my dad, and then I worked through it in regards to my stepdad. And it's called the Grief Recovery Handbook. And it's not just a book you like read and you're just like, cool, that was a cool chapter. It's like a workbook. Okay. And I always tell people, like, I suggest them to do it with somebody. But that book, doing it with my therapist, single-handedly changed my journey. It was almost as if like God placed that book in front of her to suggest it to me. She had just started using it like in her therapy. And so anyway, using therapy for me was like my outlet. I loved that it was in Atlanta because I had a 45-minute drive home where I was just sitting in silence and like processing. I'm such a busy mom, wife, like I'm involved in so many different things that I never gave myself the space to process. I never was allowing myself to feel before this. And then this huge loss was dropped on me again, and I had no choice. I needed to get myself healthy for my daughter who was just born, Yeah. And so I really feel like, grief recovery, but probably recovery in general, it heals your heart in a way that really no other process can, so that you can be 100% for relationships in life again.
Yeah.
I feel like my time with my therapist, like I would walk in there and I would say something and she like could finish my sentence. I'm like, how do you know that? But it's because she's a professional, she knows what she's doing. It was super helpful because there was a time where my husband came in and he came to a couple sessions with me because he was trying to fix things. There was a lot of things that we had to do in regards to my dad's house and his will and his belongings and money. And, we had to get an attorney. And so I was overwhelmed and Cole was constantly trying to fix things. And a lot of times I just needed him to listen. And so him going to therapy with me and just listening in on what we were talking about and what my therapist, could suggest to him in ways that he could support me, that was a game changer. My mom came to a couple sessions with me because, although my mom and my dad were divorced, my mom also lost the father of her child, and so that was like a complicated loss for her. And it really just opened up a space where I felt like, and I purposely went to this Christian counselor, right? And I was always scared to see a Christian counselor because I'm like, what are they going to do? Tell me to pray about it? Well, I already do that, And I told her on the first time, I was like, please don't tell me to pray about anything because I'm praying about it all, And she was like, I won't tell you to do that, I promise. But I feel like it was like this perfect culmination of personal development, but also spiritual development. Because I think anytime you lose something, whether, you're going through of addiction or a loss or whatever, it's a great chance for spiritual development. And that's what it did for me. It helped develop me as a person, as a friend, as a wife, as a mom, but it also developed me as a follower of Christ. And I really don't think that I would be where I am right now mentally and physically and emotionally if it wasn't for diving into therapy right after.
Yeah, it can do so much. Did you ever do any other forms of therapy like EMDR, dialectical behavior therapy, or was it strictly just talk therapy?
Talk therapy was all I did. I thankfully I was not there when my dad passed. And so I don't have any things to, look back on that are scary or bring up, nightmares or anything like that. So I really felt like talk therapy was all I needed.
And it can be so helpful.
It was.
So, you were kind of young when your father passed away, like 30. How old were you?
So I will be 38 this year. Wild. So I was 30 when he passed.
30. Yeah, I was 30 when my father passed away too. Very young. And I just wanted to speak about that because that is young to lose a parent. And I remember when my father passed away, my person I know sent me a poem. It was a beautiful poem. And it was actually my dad's ex-wife's son. And he's amazing. He's an amazing person. His name's Adam. And it was called Welcome to the Fatherless Club. And it was this beautiful poem about no one wants to be here, but you're here. And you're part of this group now. Sometimes it's hard. Even my father's been gone now for 10 years. But when Father's Day rolls around or even if someone's just talking about their dad and you're like, I wonder what that's like, like for me in my experience, my father got sick when I was really young. So I was 18 when, I started to lose him. So like, I always craved that like male mentor in my life and it's irreplaceable in some ways. But anyway, how did that experience kind of shape you, like being in the fatherless club at 30?
Megan, it's funny you say that because I've said that to other people, but it's true. And honestly, I've said this to other people, like there is comfort in knowing that there's other people in that club, that we're not alone there, right? Mm-hmm. Like that other people have experienced this before us. And, there is like some comfort in knowing that. But, because my dad and I had kind of a complicated relationship towards the end, there was relief, if I'm being honest. Mm-hmm. And I felt guilty saying that for a while, but there was a little bit of relief at first. That has passed. It's very sad. I miss him every day. I wish that he could be present for my kids. I think part of grief, and you probably experience this, is that we often hear that like time heals grief and that, like give it a little while, you're going to feel better. And I just feel like that can't be further from the truth. I saw this graphic not too long ago and it literally made the light bulb go off for me because for me, it explained my grief so well, but it was basically the same size circle over and over. And there was a circle around it. And the first circle was like really tight. And then the second one was like a little bigger, a little bigger, a little bigger. And so at the end, there was the same size circle, but there was this giant circle around it. And that middle circle is your grief. your grief size never really changes because the relationship that you had with that person never goes away. But the big circle around it is your life. And so your life grows around your grief. And time doesn't change that grief, but time does change your life. And so life does eventually resume a normalcy again. And so in a lot of ways, time, I think, can help you resume normal life, but it doesn't help take away the grief. Right. But it's something that I've experienced that, I'm able to talk about my dad, and I'm able to go to a wedding and watch a father-daughter dance and not sob. I'm able to talk about what happened and be real with people and share his story without it affecting my sleep that night or getting really worked up about it. I was sharing with a friend that I was recording this today with you, and she was like, well, are you preparing? And I'm like, preparing what? Like, I'm not like giving a speech, I'm just like talking about my dad.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like there are just always going to be triggers that make it real. Like for me, recently I was watching my son play baseball and he's wearing my number. I played softball growing up. My dad coached me. And so I'm out there looking and I'm like, I wish he was here. Here I am getting teared up.
Yeah.
But those things are what trigger the sadness more than, just like missing him, if you will.
So. I know exactly what you mean. I think that's where I get the most emotional is he's not a part of my kids' lives. And that is a relationship I wish so bad that I could have. And it's hard for someone like me. And I think you're like this too. Like, obviously I'm an optimist. My podcast is called that. And I'm a Pollyanna and I can rationalize everything. Okay. I can find the good in anything. Right. Yes. But the loss of someone you love, there's no way to sugarcoat that. There's nothing you can do. But I really love how you kind of gave that metaphor, that visual of the grief. That's so interesting. That image, and I can see that. Yeah, the grief stays, but the time expands.
Someone told me one time there's only two for sure things in life, taxes and death. And I was like, you're right.
Both are horrible.
And, I feel fortunate that a lot of my friends have never experienced deep loss. But as we get older, people are starting to enter into ages where, grandparents are dying or their own parents are dying. And, in a lot of ways, I am so thankful that God has equipped me to be there for them because I truly can relate to what they're going through. Right. And so I really am just thankful that God has used me, and that I'm not thankful that I had to go through it, but I'm thankful that He was with me through it all. And I'm thankful that, I have the opportunity to try to share joy with people because the world needs more joy for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And you being an advocate for it, I think, like to go back to the quote, like, this is what God created you for. This is your platform. This is your calling. This is your purpose. So sweet. It definitely comes through. So we have come to the lightning round of our show. So every guest gets the same 5 questions, and it's mainly because I'm curious what your answers are. Like, I genuinely am curious what everyone's answers in the whole world are to these questions. Okay, number 1, you're given 3 options. You have to choose one, like have to. Number 1, shark dive, bungee jump, or skydive?
Skydive, because that's how I met Cole.
Oh my God, so cute.
Yeah.
You met him at a skydiving place?
Cole and I met the day that we both jumped out of an airplane.
Like just randomly?
We were there like as a big group. So he was a friend of a friend of a friend. And literally he jumped out of the airplane in a Winnie the Pooh costume. That's a story for another day too.
Another podcast.
And yeah, literally. And that day was the day we met. And he will tell you that I tried to take him home that night. I did not. Okay. I did want him to kiss me that night and he did not. But he did ask me out. So I won that.
Do you know what this is giving? Like an episode of The Bachelor.
Right? I love it.
That's so cute. I didn't know that part of y'all's story. Okay, number 2. You're in a simulation, and every time you walk into a room, the same song plays. What's your song?
Right now, because Henry and I sing this all the time, Should Have Been a Cowboy.
Okay.
We love that song. He knows every single word. We get down to it in the kitchen. Okay. And yeah, I'd be singing that.
Okay.
I love me some 90s country.
I love 90s country. Big fan. All right. Number 3. I know you have one of these because you have 2 precious children. What is your favorite Disney movie?
Ooh, gosh, Megan. That's hard. I'm going to go with Cinderella.
Classic.
Because I love a happy ending and I love that her stepsisters tried their hardest and they lost.
They did.
And that is a good example of some tenacity.
That is a good way to look at
Yes.
it. And honestly, he was probably the cutest prince. If you like do an evaluation of all the princes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
And he was like, he like worked really hard to get her. Like he went all over
did.
town with that shoe.
I know. Wasn't just a given.
No, he was a zaddy, right?
Yeah, he was.
Number 4, what is something you're obsessed with?
My husband,
Zaddy.
Zaddy, definitely obsessed with him. If I didn't want to give the cliche answer, I am obsessed with my date cookies.
Oh, I've seen these on your
Megan.
Instagram.
My gosh, they are so good. We eat them every night. It's probably a problem at this point. Might need to check my blood sugar, but they're so dang good. I'm obsessed.
I saw the video of you doing this, and I loved that video because you did one where it wasn't good. Tell us how you did it. You did it.
So,
okay.
So you take a date, take the pit out. If you don't buy them pitted, take the pit out. You're going to put a tiny bit of butter. Sounds bizarre. Little bit of butter, a couple chocolate chips. Doesn't matter what kind of chocolate chips. It's all the same. A little bit of sea salt. And then you're going to heat it up in the microwave. Make sure you heat it on low heat.
Okay.
Or it will burn. And just get it enough to where it's melty. And I swear, I'll put my hand on the Bible. It tastes like a chocolate chip cookie. It will blow your mind.
Okay. I mean, I'm going to try this tonight. I'm excited.
You have to. I'll bring you one if you need one.
Yes, yes. Okay, last question. Number 5. What does freedom mean to you?
Freedom to me is eternity. Like living my life knowing that there is nothing I can do that would separate me from the love of Christ and from living in eternity with him. I think that just really goes back to like my roots in faith and just knowing that I am not perfect, although I try to be better than I was every single day than I was yesterday. I will always fall short because I'm human, and that's okay. And Jesus created me for a reason, and I'm going to live out my days doing the best I can. And that freedom to live authentically is so beautiful. And just knowing that like I am loved by my creator and there is no one else that will ever love me like he does. And I get to live forever with him. It's so beautiful.
It is beautiful. I love you so much. I wish I could give you a big hug right now.
I'm
gonna come over.
Not together. Also, the pink. I just cannot. How cute are we? We're so cute.
Yes.
We're
okay,
so
I'm
cute.
coming over later to give you a big hug.
Okay, please. I need a hug.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. You're going to help so many people with your story. I mean, not everyone is going to be able to relate to what you've been through, but the people that need to hear it, this can be transformative and help them to not feel so alone. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me on. It was so fun.
All right. Bye, girl.
Bye.